Good evening and welcome to Watchmen on the Wall, your weekly Christian current affairs program. Tonight we're investigating the controversial issue of legitimizing the sex industry. Several countries around the world have already either decriminalized or legalized prostitution, and many more are falling prey to this misguided pressure to follow suit. In South Africa, our government is also considering going the same route, which would prove incredibly dangerous and detrimental to our society. In this show, Errol Naidu will speak to various stakeholders, including a counsellor who runs the Vice Squad that polices the sex industry on the streets of Cape Town, and I will speak to a ministry that reaches out to prostitutes. Before we do that, however, it is imperative that we debunk the myths that are constantly espoused in the media, as these lies ultimately influence the public and decision makers. There are three critical fallacies that are often put forward as positive reasons for why a state should legalize or decriminalize prostitution. Number one, that doing so would decrease growth and demand for the trade. Number two, that it would improve the safety and health of prostitutes. And number three, that professionalizing the industry would dignify prostitutes and reduce the stigma surrounding the sex trade. Extensive research has been conducted by various organizations, and evidence has consistently shown that decriminalizing or legalizing of prostitution is the worst possible outcome for any given society or country, and equally has devastating consequences for women and children. If we address the first myth, we see that despite arguments by various pro-prostitution organizations, legalizing the trade will not curb the growth or demand for prostitution. In every country that has legalized or decriminalized prostitution, there has been a marked increase in both legal, semi-legal, and illegal trade. In Australia, for example, the state of Victoria legalized prostitution in 1989. Just 5 years later, the number of brothels, escort agencies, illegal sex places, and child trafficking doubled. In the Netherlands, which is often used as a success story, the number of illegal brothels and prostitutes equals that of legal ones, and a corrupt police in bed with the pimps and brothel owners have little motivation to take action in policing or prosecuting offenders. In the Netherlands alone, the trafficking of women and children has reached epidemic proportions to try and meet the preference of sex customers, and the industry continues to grow every year. Women from former Eastern Bloc countries and even Africa are being trafficked into the Netherlands as demand grows for certain looks, body types, races, and ages. The Netherlands is currently planning future strategies of how to target the poor for voluntary prostitution. This is diabolical as it exploits needy people for sex. By legitimizing and legalizing the trade, the government has effectively endorsed the exploitation and commodification of women, and ethical and moral boundaries around prostitution have been systematically removed with each generation. This is a very disturbing trend for any society. The second myth put forward is that by legalizing prostitution or decriminalizing it, we would then help to improve the safety and health of prostitutes, as they would then be required to go for regular HIV tests, receive better treatment from police, and protection within legal sex clubs and brothels. This is a naive, if not ignorant, argument for a few reasons. Having prostitutes screened for sexual diseases or HIV means nothing if their customers are not screened. The pressure to have unprotected sex is high, and legalizing the industry will not curb this phenomenon, especially when pimps, madams, and prostitutes themselves are offered more money for unprotected sex and risque acts. This behavior undermines any health initiatives. On the issue of safety, various interviews conducted with prostitutes have shown that they do not feel any safer under a legal system. Prostitution is fueled by violence. Pimps use violence and rape to force women into prostitution, and male clients often use violence and abuse to get what they want in their sexual encounters. Other than having police on guard outside brothel bedrooms, there really is no way to accurately guarantee the safety of prostitutes. Brothels have little to no motivation to report abuse for fear of bad press or being shut down. The third fallacy put forward by pro-prostitution organizations is that legalizing the sex trade and professionalizing it will give prostitutes dignity and remove the stigma surrounding their work. What ordinary people don't realize, though, is that decriminalizing prostitution actually decriminalizes the whole industry, pimps, brothels, massage parlors, and allows them to flourish with very few restraints. Basically, it stimulates the emergence of sex entrepreneurs and the sale of women for sex. Dignifying prostitution as a career does not dignify the women who are in it. It simply dignifies the sex industry. Legalizing prostitution sends the message to new generations of men and boys that women are sexual commodities and that prostitution is harmless fun. How is that dignifying women at all? The Bible calls us to speak up for those who cannot speak for themselves. Most women did not choose to enter prostitution willingly. For many, it was their last resort. For countless more, it was never their own choice, as they were trafficked into the trade. The research speaks for itself. Decriminalizing or legalizing the industry does not curb the abuses, nor does it hinder the demand. The exploitation of women should never be legalized. We will offer you more compelling information on this topic after the break. But first, here's Lucia Johnson with the news. Over to you, Lucia.
Thank you, Jackie. Good evening and welcome to your Global Christian News Roundup. In breaking news, the Sudanese government bombed its own people in a crowded marketplace recently, even as its own president meets in Ethiopia for peace talks. These talks come in the follow-up to the secession of the Christian South Sudan from the Muslim North in last February. North Sudan has constantly bombed and invaded the South, torturing and persecuting Christians as well as destroying whole villages and churches. Muslim President Umar al-Bashir signed an agreement with South Sudan President Salva Kiir to reopen pipelines between the countries and re-establish the demilitarized border zone. But while the two met, a bomb run killed at least one civilian and injured 6 others in a border area. The two countries have had strained relations since the succession, and hundreds of Christians are constantly being persecuted. Please pray for the peace talks and the citizens of South Sudan, as many Christians are constantly under attack. Moving to Kenya now, where a tragic bombing of a Sunday school occurred last week. Widespread anger and disbelief filled the Kenyan capital of Nairobi after a grenade was thrown into a local Sunday school, leaving 1 child dead and several injured. A class of children were going to Sunday school lessons next to an Anglican church when a grenade went off. A parishioner who was in the church when the attack happened told reporters that, quote, "We were just worshipping God in the church and suddenly we heard an explosion and people started running for their lives." It is suspected that the Somali Islamist group Al-Shabaab are responsible for the explosion. The explosion in a makeshift classroom next to the school in an outlying neighborhood city comes as a revenge attack in retaliation to the Kenyan army, who continues its assault on the Al-Shabaab stronghold in the Somali port of Kismayu. Kenya's fast-growing capital has braced a major terrorist attack since the country sent troops into neighboring Somalia last year. Kenyan police last week announced the seizure of a haul of weapons and explosives they claim were to be used by the Al-Shabaab sympathizers. Please pray for Kenya and for the salvation of its people, and intercede for the many Christians that are currently under numerous attacks in Kenya. And finally, positive news from America, where millions of students from across the country gathered at their individual school campuses to pray for the nation, towns, and cities. Despite all the controversy in the country around public prayer gatherings, the First Amendment of America's Constitution guarantees students the right to pray on the school grounds during non-instructional time, such as before and after school. A spokesperson from the annual prayer event called See You at the Pole was overjoyed with the response from students and stated that, quote, "Revival preceded the American Revolution. America was birthed in prayers. America will be sustained in prayer." It is encouraging to see so many young people come together to pray for their nation. We encourage all churches, schools and student organizations to do the same and organize meetings where they get together to pray for our nation. And that's a wrap from Watchmen on the Wall News. Stay tuned for more after the break.
We're standing in St. George's Mall where we'll be speaking to ordinary South Africans about their views on prostitution.
It's wrong. It's wrong. There are other ways a person can acquire an income, not specifically prostitution.
I think it's a very wrong thing to do. I don't think it should be institutionalized because it's wrong.
In terms of protection for them, it would be best.
I think that if it was decriminalized, it could be better regulated.
I think it's quite a good thing. I think it would be amazing if we could control the industry.
I don't think it must be legal in South Africa. What is the example they're going to set for the children here?
Well, at this point, we've got a very high level of HIV and AIDS. Prostitution, it's not really a very good idea.
And I know some people think it's easy making money, but I'm sure there's many other honest ways of making money.
It's not going to stop it, but yeah, just to have some kind of control over it, I think would be quite a good thing.
I don't necessarily agree that it should be something that's legal, but I do think that they need a lot more protection than they currently have.
Kind of surprised the government actually trying to make it legal. It's not good, it's not setting a good example to South Africans. And me, even as a citizen, I don't find it very appropriate morally.
I think it's really ridiculous, and I mean the young children of today, we actually look up to that big people. They're not supposed to legalize something like that.
I think it's degrading that they want to do something like that.
And there you have it. These are the views of ordinary South Africans on the topic of decriminalizing prostitution. This is Lucia Johnson signing off. Back to the studio.
Welcome back. Our guest in the studio this evening is JP Smith, the Mayoral Committee Member for Safety and Security in the City of Cape Town. JP, welcome to Watchmen on the Wall, and thank you for joining us this evening.
It's a pleasure, Errol.
Now, we see in the media this push by various lobby groups to decriminalize prostitution in South Africa. The reason I invited you in is because you've got the Vice Squad here in the City of Cape Town, and I think you've had most success with closing down brothels, rescuing women out of both prostitution and trafficking issues, and arresting pimps. You're very unpopular in the media. They've been attacking you for that, but we want to hear your side of the story. What is actually happening with prostitution and all the organized crime links to it on the street from your perspective?
I'm glad we occasionally get to state our position on this. Because I think, as you say, there is a propensity among certain liberal media to distort the facts. I get the impression sometimes some of them have watched the movie Pretty Woman a few times too many. So all I can say to them is please burn your copy, because the reality on the street is very different from what is presented to us by sweat and lobby groups. And I think the misguided and romanticized beliefs held by some of the journalists.
Can you just, for our viewers' interest sake, explain what are they saying about prostitution? What is their argument for decriminalization?
I think it's a job creation argument to say that it is one way for women to seek employment or gain employment or have gainful employment with potentially limited skills, and that there are few barriers to entrance into that employment environment. I would suggest that that might be true, but there are many barriers against exiting it again. And we'll say more about that in a moment perhaps, but it's an argument that forgets about the human toll, the extent to which that exploitative machine eats up and spits out the women and young men who get trapped.
And that's what the Vice Squad is seeing on a daily basis.
That's what we see on a daily basis, that very unromanticized, gritty reality, the unhealthy underbelly of that industry, and the cost to the humans involved, the cost to the people involved, and often very vulnerable people, people who are not in a particularly strong position to defend or protect themselves to start with. And often substance abuse is integrally involved, various forms of exploitation or manipulation or blackmail or threats through sometimes the withholding of a child. We've seen young women who have had children taken away from them and held by a pimp, and any other form of exploitation and manipulation. Also the extent to which young women particularly are manipulated in getting into the industry. So that we will see that they respond to comparatively legitimate advertisements for receptionists and other jobs that sound reasonably harmless. But once there, they discover that it's a receptionist for one of the two big, and I'm not going to credit them with any free marketing, but one of the two big massage parlors / brothels here in the city, in the city centre.
They're fronts for prostitution.
They're fronts for prostitution, and that they will be, they'll be pulled into it because they're desperate for employment, and will soon find that manning the telephone is something they get to do for one day. The next day they're asked to help out. And there have been several people who have been trying to highlight that exploitation, the manipulation of how people are pulled into the industry. People like Professor Barry Fletcher and others who have been trying to highlight how that whole scam works and how women are tricked into those jobs.
Now, here's the thing I don't understand. You guys have been the most successful in closing down brothels, arresting the people that abuse and exploit women and children. You have rescued a number of young girls out of prostitution, forced prostitution, remembering the young lady whose child was being held by a Nigerian syndicate while she was forced to prostitute herself for them.
We've seen more sinister stuff than that. We've seen the young girls tricked or given drugs and brought into a condition where they're unable to defend themselves.
How young?
Ritually gang raped, 14 years old, in Belleville, in Parksig Villas, 14 years old, raped repeatedly, and then put on the open market by the pimps, continuously in a drugged state, not leaving the apartment. So assortment of men parading through there, each having their turn, and those we've now rescued out of that building alone, 3 girls in the last year and something. So we're busy doing operations to clean the building out, but they will move that operation elsewhere.
Now, here's the thing. You're doing this work, and I mean, most people in the city and around the country that hear about the Vice Squad's work and your passion to clean up our streets and arrest these criminals, they're happy with you. They thank God for organizations like the Vice Squad. But organizations like Sweat and their allies, and supported by the liberal media, are trying to close you guys down, trying to demonize you. And people don't understand that. If you're doing such a great job to protect law-abiding citizens and to rescue vulnerable women and children out of this terrible exploitative industry, why would people be against you? Why would Sweat want to close you down, demonize you, and why would the liberal media help them? Can you explain that?
I think Sweat are remarkably skillful. I am frequently surprised by how adept they are at reinvigorating the debate on different levels. And I can just say to the general South African population, this debate about decriminalization is going to come to a head at some point. And national government is going to have to apply its mind on it. And I'm very worried about what shapes the impressions of those MPs, what shapes their thinking. So from my party side, I have tried to get a working group assembled. We're just about to start that process to make sure that all of our MPs understand the facts robustly, that we get the Vice Squad to come and talk to them, that we get the NGOs to come and talk to them. I will try and reach as many of them as possible. But certainly I can immediately reach the ones within my own party lines. And even among them, I find that some people have some really ridiculous ideas, some farcical ideas about what this industry consists of. So that's my fault. The fact that they still believe some of the things and the views that they hold is because we haven't taken the time to go and share the facts with them competently. So I want to give them the benefit of 14 or 12 years that I spent on the Atlantic seaboard working as a councillor in Greenpoint and Seapoint, where I got to see at first hand what that industry did to the prostitutes that would arrive in year 1, and by year 4 the machine was spitting them out broken, dysfunctional, scarred, tattooed, eaten up by drugs, and then death sometime thereafter, viciously beaten, hurt, constantly exploited. It's not an industry that is empowering.
But now you're fighting against the media machine here, because they're putting this romantic notion of prostitution out there, and you are working to explain to people what really happens on the streets. You think you're fighting a losing battle?
No, not at all. I've seen journalists, once you go show them what the reality on the street is, they change their perspective. In fact, the best thing we can do is to get the journalists to go out with the Vice Squad themselves, and we try and do that as often as possible. Once in a while, the Vice Squad and the head of the Vice Squad will invite journalists out themselves, and occasionally I will invite certain journalists out with us and try and so they can spend an evening with us and see what's going on in these brothels, see what happens to young women who have their travel documents taken away from them, who can't speak English, young Chinese, Mozambican, Zambian, Zimbabwean nationals who are brought here under false pretexts, who are smuggled in by boat to Mozambique and brought across the border. No travel documents, can't speak English. And when you do eventually debrief them with the aid of a translator, say to us, if I go home now without fulfilling my contract here, my family will be harmed by the gangsters. See young women who come from Uniondale and Beaufort West and all over the country who are
essentially
tricked into coming here for domestic worker jobs, for modeling jobs, for all kinds of jobs which they think is going to build them a future, that's going to earn them an income, and then find out that it's much nastier and get trapped in that. On the journalist, it's not an irremediable situation. We can work with them. And there are individual journalists who are quite resistant to it, who have an opinion on it and who won't change that opinion. But I find many of the journalists, we can feed information, and it's all about how if we are as diligent as Sweat are in carrying their message out, in carrying our message out, that is essential. But the broader public, come the time for this legislation to be discussed nationally, are going to have to stand up and make their voices heard, because all too often they leave it for a few people out front. And it's very easy to demonize those key figures who are driving the debate. It's very easy to play them into a corner or criticize them for some aspect. The broader public are going to have to make their voices heard, figure out who those MPs are part of the discussion, write to them and get them to hear their voices, because they're the silent majority. And when this legislation comes up, we must prevent it so that we do not end up in a situation like Amsterdam, where you now have the mayor frantically trying to press the rewind button on
legalize and decriminalize prostitution.
Absolutely.
JP, where can people get information about the corruption line and other information about the sex industry and how to deal with it?
Okay, well, can I say that for starters, on our web address, no matter what municipal problem you have, the call center numbers are on there. For any policing emergency, it's 021 596 1999. That is everything from a burst pipe to a medical emergency, fire emergency. All those numbers go to one call center where the people are trained and know where to divert it. As for the city, on the city website, www.capetown.gov.za, there on the left are a series of buttons. One of them is the contact numbers. On that is the Corruption Buster hotline and every other service that you could access. And I really want to encourage people, if you have any indication of police corruption, let us know, because that is our job to clean up.
We're running out of time, JP, but we're going to come back with some more with JP Smith after this break. Welcome back. Our guest in the studio this evening is JP Smith, the Mayoral Committee Member for Safety and Security in the City of Cape Town. JP, the purpose for this program is to educate and inform the broader public out there, because they're not getting this side of the debate. That's why we asked you to come in. But there's a lot of deception out there, and people don't really understand this issue. And we know that the law reform and prostitution is going to be tabled in Parliament in the next few weeks. And our job is to get the right information out to people. Now, while the Justice Portfolio Committee was debating the anti-trafficking bill, there were a few members of that committee that believed that trafficking wasn't really a big issue. It was happening, but very sporadically. What is your evidence, and what have you seen on the streets?
Well, I mean, it's very important to quantify things correctly. You can't understand it and deal with it unless you have accurate figures.
That's right.
And certainly some of the NGOs' figures about 60,000 women being trafficked and stuff, that was misleading. And the problem is when you do that, when you cry wolf like that, everybody thereafter loses interest in a thing. Compared to 60,000, what else sounds terrible? 10, 15, does that sound bad? Compared to 60,000, no. But one, for me, is a problem. One woman being trafficked. And trafficking we have certainly seen. And it's not the kind of trafficking you see in American movies where women are put in containers, hauled across the oceans. It's a different kind of trafficking. For starters, it's primarily domestic. Main victims of trafficking we see are vulnerable young women, black, colored females from poor neighborhoods in the rest of this province and elsewhere in the country, who are brought to cities under false pretense or manipulated into it, and then put in an untenable situation and become prostitutes. And their lives is they're on a rapid downward tilt from there on. That's why we enthusiastically work with the NGOs to offer those exit programs, because as policing entity, we can enforce the law. We can be creative with our bylaws about how we describe the offences so that we can effectively deal with them and not trap ourselves in weaknesses within our own legislation. But on the developmental side, a lot more work is done. And I think there's another rallying call we can give to the general public. You and churches that you're involved in have done great work in terms of rallying people to that cause, supplying those exit programs. That's one of my greatest beefs with Sweat, aside from the misinformation that they spew out, is the fact that they refuse to do any kind of exit program or any kind of meaningful exit program. And in fact, one of the employees, I understand, who had started to advocate exit programs and exiting the industry was dismissed by them.
That's right, yeah.
Which for me is an indicator of what they're about. They're a lobby group for the decriminalization of prostitution for whoever benefits from that side of the industry. What we must do is develop the exit programs and inform everybody so that when we're all participants in that debate every day with our colleagues, with our friends, and we assume a whole lot about what people understand and think. I'm often surprised what even my close friends and stuff think about these kind of issues. So we must constantly just carry out that accurate message.
Yeah, I think the key is to give people correct information so they can make informed decisions, especially when Parliament begins to ask for public comment. We've got to make sure that people know what they're talking about when they talk about decriminalized prostitution.
And the trafficking issue, because when your conception of trafficking is this exotic foreign thing, women being brought in by men with machine guns in containers and all the high drama, and the reality ends up being much more mundane, then they say, well, that's not a problem. Of course it's a problem. It's a problem when poor women from rural areas are sold and bartered and exchanged. That is a problem. Yeah. It's a problem when poor girls from the Cape Flats are bought into the industry and tricked into the industry here, because my view is our women are not for sale, and I will do whatever I can, humbly from our little corner and within our limited sphere of power on this issue to do that. And that's why we're running the Vice Squad, and we will continue to run the Vice Squad. And no amount of creative machinations from Sweat to undo it will succeed.
Now, Sweat's argument for decriminalizing prostitution is that I saw a report where they did a survey, and in that survey they said they spoke to about 1,300 prostitutes on the street, and they got a figure of 70% of police are corrupt. They're raping prostitutes, they are stealing money from them and abusing them. And that's why they're calling for decriminalized prostitution. But decriminalized prostitution, what people don't understand is it would make legitimate businessmen of brothel keepers, of pimps, of organized crime figures that exploit and abuse women. Question to you is, decriminalized prostitution, will it help the woman? Will it help protect their rights and all of that?
I have no doubt about this. If you go and look around you and you look at the individuals you're dealing with, decriminalizing it is not going to change those individuals. What it will do is what it has done in the Netherlands, is float a small portion of the industry above the waterline. You'll see a small part of it legalizing itself, working within the framework of the law to help launder the ill-gotten gains from the rest of the industry. And there are too many linkages. If you look at some of the key role players in Cape Town, and they outed themselves in the media over the last year, a simple collection on camera of the news snippets by Karen Dolly in her interviews with some of these individuals tells the whole story. These are not people whose criminal dealings, whose assassinations, whose organized crime activities, whose other smuggling and money laundering activities and links to Bulgarian and Russian mafia is going to change. What you will do is allow them a legitimate vehicle to launder the ill-gotten gains. And Sweat understands this very well. That's what freaks me out about Sweat, is that they cannot be as close to the industry as they claim to be and not know this, which makes you wonder what they're really about. If I, as a participant in this equation, can see what I see from our dealings with it, Sweat must understand this very well. And they must either be willfully concealing it or have a whole different agenda. And that's what worries me about Sweat.
So would you say that decriminalizing prostitution in South Africa is possibly the worst thing you could do for women and children?
It's certainly not going to help. It's not going to improve their plight. It's going to make a little bit of the industry, the stuff you see here visibly in the upper end brothels. It'll clean. It will, those women who will be fully legal and the industry will comply. But the rest of it will carry on underground as it is. And it will do so for a whole variety of reasons, part of which is all the drugs and the manipulation and extortion that happens in it. So I don't see how it helps the women in any way. The current women involved in prostitution do not have limitations in terms of the access to medical services or any other services. There's no laws preventing them from any of this. They say that there's stigmatization, but stigmatization won't be resolved through law. The stigmatization that the nurse in the clinic might have, that we can deal with through training, and we do. It won't be helped through a law. In fact, if you want to see the public react, force something on them that they don't agree with and watch how malicious they become towards the interpretation of legislation. I see this with the unintended consequence of bylaws all the time. The fact is the majority of our population do not support that course of action. And I can't understand how government would carry through such legislation without acknowledging the will of the majority of the people here. It would be a minority of noisy and skillful lobbyists who would get such legislative changes effective.
I agree with that, and that's why we're going to do a lot of work at Family Policy Institute and through this program to get information to people, especially when they table the bill in Parliament on law reform on prostitution. We want to make sure that people speak into this issue because we're also very concerned that if prostitution is legalized or decriminalized in South Africa, that we're going to see the abuse and exploitation of women and young children rise dramatically in this nation.
You asked about police extortion. 2 weeks ago, we went out with the Vice Squad, and in Bellville, a couple of the prostitutes told us that some of the Metro Police members, they accused SAPS and pointed out specific SAPS members who actually drove around the block at that point repeatedly to come and watch us, were taking bribes from them as small as 10 Rand to buy Coca-Cola.
Taking bribes from the prostitutes?
Prostitutes to leave them alone. And we're taking other favors and sexually abusing them, handcuffing them in a vehicle and then abusing them. I mean, there's a word for that. And these are criminal offenses and those members must be punished. But what upset me terrifically is that the whole way in which the Vice Squad has been set up is to avoid that scenario. Large group of people who go out 8 at a time, men and women.
So they're accountable to each other.
Accountable to each other. They never work alone. The whole mechanism is set up. The reason they travel in a large combi is so that it's an interviewing space, but it's also a way to ensure peer review. Everybody is watching everybody. They don't go off and do stuff in dark corners. They work as a group. They speak to the women collectively. And that is to make sure that everybody stays on the straight and narrow. Certainly there is, and I've seen too much evidence of it in past years not to know that it's true. There's evidence of police. I think the claims of some of the prostitutes are correct, and there we must act. And it bugs me that if more effective action is not being taken. Now, I've got an undercover operation against the SAPS members that are the Metro Police members who were accused, And we've, by way of making sure that we get testimony from the prostitutes in question, we've offered them a reward for information because I want those people out of my service.
So you're effectively dealing with the corruption in police.
You have to.
But you don't think decriminalizing prostitution is going to help the corruption in the police force?
Well, why would it? I mean, if those members are corrupt, they're doing other bad things. They're not just sexually assaulting the prostitutes. They'll be lying about information. They'll be concealing other crimes. They'll be colluding with other people. If you have no integrity in how you deal with a woman in that vulnerable situation, whatever you think of the industry, that's a human being there. That's a woman in a situation which is untenable. And she might have been forced into it. She might have made a series of bad decisions. You know, like Ellen said in her interview.
Ellen Jordan, yeah.
Said, you're presented with a menu of options, and sometimes you make a decision off that menu, and sometimes, the rest of society doesn't help you see the full menu. They're there because at some point that felt like the right thing or the only thing that was available to them. So whatever we think, they're still women we must protect. We must protect from harm. They're our citizens, they're our women, they're part of our community. So we're doing something, we're trying to clean that up, and where I catch other members, and if the message gets out, prostitutes are watching this, please understand that there is a reward for information. May contact us. We will pay good money to get our officers who are doing these bad things and get them out of our service.
Is there a number if people see prostitution or prostitutes being abused? Is there a number they can call?
Absolutely. Well, both for the complaint and for reporting the members, 021 596 1999. Or if they are not sure that their message is going to come to the right people, they can contact our forensic service, our corruption hotline, which is all over the council website, www.capetown.gov.za. Or the members of the Vice Squad. They can tell any of the ladies on the Vice Squad what's happening. That information will come back. We will deal with that. Our own special investigation unit and our anti-fraud unit will go and investigate. And if I can find evidence of it, if the vehicle's tracker details for those 3 members matches what that prostitute claimed, they're out of our service. So we must deal with corruption, but it's not going to help.
It's important to know that.
Absolutely, but that's not going to make the problem go away. Decriminalizing will not stop an officer from sexually assaulting a woman. Why? Why? Because if he's going to abuse his position of power, and in fact that he has a weapon and pepper spray on him, etc., what will stop him? The fact that she's now legal, he'll tackle her for other offences, for noise or being drunk in public.
Or loitering.
So the problem is that you have bad members. You don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. You deal with the corrupt state of those members. It would be the same as saying, well, cops harass other criminals like a person involved in petty crime, stealing a car radio. So you catch the guy stealing the car and you say, give me the car radio and I'll let you go. That's decriminalizing the theft of property or property theft. Doesn't clean up the corruption in the police.
Correct,
you must clean up the corruption in the police. So that evasive answer doesn't help. You don't decriminalize, rape or sexual assault because some men can't control themselves. Decriminalizing the offence is not a way to deal with the problem. We must find more effective ways of monitoring and auditing our police.
JP, we want to thank you for coming into the Watchmen on the Wall studio and sharing this information with us. We think it's vital. People need to be informed with the other side of the perspective, which is basically the truth about what's happening with the sex industry in South Africa. We'll be back after the short break.
Welcome back to the show. If you're just joining us, we are speaking on prostitution. And in studio, I've got Marjorie Bruve, and she is the ministry manager for the prostitution wing of Straatwerk. Marjorie, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. Privilege being here.
Now, Marjorie, we had some very interesting discussions earlier on about the Ministry of Straatwerk. Can you tell us a bit about what you guys do?
Sure. The ministry has been around for about 40 years. And we have the privilege of reaching out with the good news of Jesus Christ to different people groups in Cape Town and surrounding areas. So people that's homeless or lost their way in some way, the nightlife, and then also this ministry concerning prostitution. Then we have the privilege of speaking in churches and engaging with the church in different ways.
Fantastic. Now, Marjorie, you've had quite a lot of experience in the area of working with prostitutes and helping people that are trapped in prostitution. Can you tell us a bit about the work that you do at Straatwerk?
Sure. We've had, for quite a while, we've had the privilege of reaching out to these ladies on the streets before, on the boats, so engaging in conversation with them, and we still have the privilege of doing that. At this stage, we also focus on the part of just speaking into the church, because we see there's a lot of people that has a hope in their hearts and somehow want to get involved. So we're more involved with training also. So at this stage here in the Cape Town area, there's different teams reaching out to the ladies that's involved in the lifestyle, and together we form Project Restoration. And from Straatwerk side, we try to do some facilitating and training concerning that, while we're also involved in the ministry directly with the ladies and their families.
That's wonderful, Marjorie, and I think that it's important that we give people the good news of Christ as well as helping them out of their situation. Now, you work specifically on the ground with prostitutes, and you probably see the other side that most of us at home don't know about. And with all the calls for the legalization and the decriminalizing of prostitution, people have painted a very romantic picture of the industry. What has been your experience working in those situations?
Yeah, Jackie, it's so damaging, this whole lifestyle, and the privilege we have because we journey with the ladies are that they give us insight in what they experience from a heart level and not a clinical, let's fill in a list angle. I just talked to a lady this morning and I said, well, she's out for 7 months now, and I said, so what did it do to you? And she said, well, I felt dirty and worthless. And then she waited a little bit and then she said, cheap. And I think that's often the experience, that they're cheap and being used. I thought of another lady one night. She was just saying, I have to sleep with this man. I don't want to sleep with him. And she just lay down on the ground and just put her head on one of our laps and cried in a fetal position. And the damage done in the sense of relational, social, psychological, emotional, it shows in so many ways as the damage is really in every aspect of their lives and every level of their functioning.
So despite what people would have us believe, prostitution isn't a preferred career choice. It's actually a last resort for a lot of these women.
Yeah, and they see, for them, they when they get caught up in it, it's so difficult to get out of it. So as you say, they feel they're at the end of their rope. So they start doing this thinking that they'll only be there for a short amount of time, and then they'll leave it and do something else, but then they get caught up in it. Recently, one lady that we've known for many years, she said, Marjorie, I'm not addicted to drugs, I'm not addicted to alcohol, but I'm addicted to being here. So it's really the lifestyle is addicting, and then everything that happens there is damaging to the woman and how she sees herself and how she thinks about the world.
And Marjorie, what is the average profile of a prostitute? Is it usually someone who's poor? Is it someone who's maybe trapped in drugs? Is there a certain type of woman that enters into prostitution?
Yeah, I'm so glad you asked that. Often it's seen that poverty is the main cause, and often that is a pushing factor that plays a big role. But most of or not all of the ladies that's involved in the lifestyle are poor, and everybody that's poor doesn't get involved in the lifestyle. So I would say the common denominator is the brokenness of the ladies even before they enter prostitution. So most of them have been sexually abused before they entered, often as children, sometimes later in their lives. So they already feel like they can be bought and used and abused. So then when entering prostitution would only mean that you then get paid for the thing that before was just taken from you. I would say that's the profile, a broken person that doesn't see her own worth, doesn't see any other hope, and feels that it's her only resort, and then makes that choice. So they're both victims of their situation, and they also make choices because of their brokenness, and that is the common denominator that we find in all of these ladies.
I think you've brought up a very good point there, Marjorie, because for the ordinary person at home, we tend to think that a prostitute has chosen this career and whatever comes with it is really what they've desired. And some of the pro-prostitution organizations would have us believe that it is a career and that we should restore dignity to it by decriminalizing and legalizing prostitution. But in fact, as you've said, a lot of the women are victims themselves. Now, with all the calls to legalize the industry, and with your work that you do with the ladies on the street, do you think that legalizing or decriminalizing prostitution would actually help to give dignity to these ladies and get them out of their situation and the dangers that they face?
No. Jackie, the thing is that, you know, the situation or the environment in which prostitution happens does have an influence, and there's a lot of conversation we can have about that. The big challenge is that the damage caused by prostitution is the very act of prostitution. That's the biggest damage. So there's no way that a woman can be involved in prostitution. Doesn't matter how clean the place is, how safe the place is. When prostitution happens, somehow a price is put on a lady, a price tag, and that message will continue. So us legalizing it somehow just says that, you know, this is what you're good for. There isn't something else for you, which just somehow enforces what they already believe. See, the ladies learn to kill hope so that they can survive. You cannot hope and be involved in prostitution. But the Lord told us that He came so we can have life and have it abundantly. So our responsibility is to bring hope. And I believe it's the responsibility of the law to give people hope. In every law, it should give hope. And as a society, we have that responsibility of carrying hope into people's lives and helping each other to live the life that we are made for. They're beautiful people. It's amazing women. But they so often miss what their lives really are about and should be about.
And they end up being victims of their circumstances. So Marjorie, in conclusion, for the viewers at home, for churches and community leaders, is there a way that they can actually help to rescue the prostitutes or to prevent ladies from ending up in prostitution?
Sure. There's so many ways. I believe with my whole heart that everything that's needed for these ladies and their families is inside of the church. The Lord gifted us with different giftedness to be able to engage in those things that we naturally do, that we like doing and that we're made to do. And we need the people that pray, we need the encouragers, we need the shepherds, we need all those people. And if anybody would like to get involved, we would love to have this conversation with each of them. So the one possibility is to get involved in the restoration side, where we reach out to the ladies, and then the journey, the long journey of walking with them towards wholeness and inner healing. People can get involved in that. And then the other aspect is the prevention leg. We believe the Lord wants to bring an end to sexual abuse and prostitution and pornography, that He wants to do it through His church and in His name. By us praying and doing what He's called us to do. So the Valuable to Jesus campaign also stands for that. It's a church campaign, and the face of it is a presentation in schools warning children against it and helping us as a society to stand as a circle in which children but also adults can be healed, because it's possible. And I've seen it so many times, and it's beautiful to see. And that message needs to go out with our words, but also with our lives. And we need to love them back to life, because of the love of Christ that changed our lives, and He's still loving us back to life.
Wonderful. Marjorie, thank you so much. It's been such a privilege to chat to you and to hear the other side, and to put a face as well to so many of those ladies that we see on the street. So for the viewers at home, I want to encourage you to get involved. There's something that you can do. If you're a church community leader, you can contact Straatwerk. If you want to volunteer and to help some of the prostitutes in the restoration, you can look on your screen right now, and there's all the contact details for the ministry, and you can go and see www.straatwerk.org.za. www.ecc.co.za. Stay tuned for more after the break. Welcome back. Tonight we've heard several compelling arguments as to why we must resist legislation that would seek to decriminalize and legalize the sex trade. In the Netherlands, where prostitution is legal, one study showed that 80% of the women in prostitution were most likely trafficked from other countries. Legalization of prostitution was promoted in the Netherlands as a way to help end child prostitution. However, it is estimated that between 1996 to 2001, the number of children in prostitution increased by over 300%, going from 4,000 to 15,000, and that 5,000 of these children were trafficked from other countries. In Victoria, a state within Australia, child prostitution has increased dramatically in comparison to other Australian provinces where prostitution has not been legalized. We hear very little about the role of the sex industry in creating a global sex market in the bodies of women and children. Instead, we hear much about making prostitution into a better job for women through regulation, through unions of prostitutes, and through campaigns that would provide them with condoms and support. We hear much about how to keep women in prostitution, but very little about how to help women get out. It is true that a small number of women say that they choose to be in prostitution, but some people choose to take highly addictive and dangerous drugs, and we recognize that it is harmful to them. Most of us would not seek to legalize the hazardous drugs people take. It is therefore the harm to the person and not the consent of the person that is the governing standard. It should be the same with the issue of prostitution. Legalizing or legitimizing an industry that exploits women and wrecks lives should never be sanctioned by the state or its residents. It is often said that he who shouts loudest wins the argument. As Christians and citizens of this beloved country, we cannot allow the dominant voices that are promoting the decriminalization and legalization of prostitution to overrule our convictions. We must educate and inform ourselves on the facts so that we can speak with authority and protect the future of our country and its people. If our government chooses to decriminalize prostitution, this would mean that certain areas or provinces, for example, could be zoned for prostitution and not face any recourse. It would mean that if your area was demarcated for sex shops, brothels, massage parlors, and other clandestine activity, it would be legitimately sanctioned by the state, and you would have very little say or control over it. If the government legalizes prostitution, This would apply to the entire country, and it would be virtually impossible to ever reverse this legislation. It has been said that prostitution is to society what incest is to a family. It is soul-destroying. That is why it is critical that South African citizens, and especially Christians, educate themselves and speak out. The bill is yet to be tabled in Parliament, so we still have time to exercise our democratic voice. Thank you for watching tonight. For more information on this topic, please contact Family Policy Institute. You can also partner with them or sign up to receive their free newsletter that provides critical updates and news. Please remember to tune in again next week Tuesday at 7 p.m. for our show. Good night and God bless.